We have a few things on our agenda. Bond planning on the Whitaker site and Jefferson modernization. So I'm gonna just go a little bit out of order. I'm gonna just touch on the Whitaker stuff, then we can go into the Jeff modernization stuff. So that way we can spend time on the bond planning, and hopefully the other two will be here. But if not, our new standard is that we will be sharing our committee meetings with every board member, so they have it. So they don't have no excuse of not seeing it or watching it or whatever they need to do to be informed. So this will go out to them directly as well. So we'll start with the Whitaker Adams site. I just wanted to bring this back up. We put a proposal for a lease. Hey, sir. Proposal for a lease for use for my buying a sports program to build a sports complex on the land at this previously Whitaker Adams site. It's a site that has been vacant for a little over 20 years now. And there was a proposal for a lease a couple of years ago. We kind of pulled back because we were looking at the reseeding of Tubman, and we wanted to make sure that site was available for the middle school if that was the plan for it to be. Turned out it's not the plan for middle school to be on that lot. So I just wanted to kind of just reintroduce that proposal. And so what I'll be asking, not at this meeting, but I'll be asking this committee to, make a proposal for this to go to the full board, so we can get a decision on that. I want to do it in two parts. I want to do the lease piece first. I also want to look at how we can do this as a partnership with PPS. I think there are some great things that's happening. I think the timing is right. There's some things that's happening in the city around sports and entertainment that I think could be beneficial for our kids here at PPS. So I want to look at it as more of a partnership. And so that's kind of the stage that I want to bring it in. I probably will ask to send this to the full board at the next facility operations meeting. I'm gonna have some things I want to introduce, some additional information, especially around when it comes to funding and things like that. And just so that at least the full board can make a decision one way or the other. So besides that, the next, I'll hand it over to Dan.
So a quick question, is there any direction or expectation from staff as far as
Nope.
Sorry, are we at the Jefferson High School?
No, we're
Organization?
doing Jefferson now. I was talking about the Whitaker. So we moved.
So what are you bringing, a resolution? Sorry,
I
I'm
have
sorry.
us, yeah, so basically our next board meeting, I'll have us move the lease to the full board so we can get a vote on that. But I have some other information I want to bring in to present to us here.
And do we have the lease, or is it?
Well, no, that's why I said I have to, that's why I want to bring it.
Okay, sorry, is it, I just want to understand what that, because it's.
This is why you're supposed to be on time.
I
It's
was
a
in
meeting.
the parking lot. Supermarket, sorry, excuse me for being late.
This whole
Definitely.
Also,
Sorry. The order.
I did change the order. We wanted to make sure we got to the bottom stuff. So I can just update you on that.
So is there a resolution to enter into a lease? It's not the actual lease itself.
Correct.
Okay,
That's what we'll go to the board, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
do you
Yeah.
want introductions?
Introductions, yes, thank you. Sorry about that. So we will start to my right over here for introductions.
Terry Fox, Communications Department.
Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Natasha Garcia, Project Manager, Office of Operations.
Dan Young, COO.
Rainier Cresswell, Senior Director for the Office of School Modernization.
Everybody, my name is Myung Lee, and I'm the new kid on the block, I guess. I'm the new interim deputy superintendent for business and operations. I think I got that.
Yes. Welcome.
Great to be here. Eddie Wong, board member.
Julia Brim Edwards, board member and committee member.
Gary Hollins, board member.
Herman Green, board member and committee member.
I am Cheryl Proctor. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for Instruction and School. Things.
Roseanne Powell, board manager.
Dana White, director for planning and real estate.
Marshall.
Okay,
Awesome. All right, so let me just get a couple of housekeeping rules real quick. So we start a new year, great time, looking for us to really like think outside the box on things, be direct with people this year. I learned a lot for the last couple of years that we've done this when we talked about things with facilities. So my charge for us is to, when we are talking with the public or talking with communities, that we just be direct with them, as forward as possible, give them any information that they need. As far as the committee goes, I love slides that are 5 slides or less. I don't really need a whole lot of pictures, and just five slides or less would be great. I feel that folks should be able to say what they need to say within those 5 slides. We try to be on time and get out on time. I try to leave in an hour and a half most of the time. So if anybody have any questions about those or comments or suggestions, please keep them to yourself. No, I'm joking.
Don't tell me.
All right.
okay.
You're up.
Next topic is a Jefferson High School modernization update. And hopefully all the board members saw a memo that went out late last week. We are going to come back and provide a comprehensive update of the Jefferson modernization here very soon. But sequence with some of the discussions that we're having, we're meeting with staff this week. We have a community event this week as well, focused on families and students. We won't be able to bring you that information. We just don't have that quite yet. So today we didn't want to certainly ignore the projects. We want to give a quick verbal update, answer questions that you might have, and then we'll be back at the next meeting or sooner if we'd like to bring us back sooner as well. So with that, I will turn over to Mary.
Thank you. He stole all of my thunder. That was pretty much my quick update. It's just to walk you through some of the things that we talked in the memo about. At the time that we met the last Facilities and Operations Committee, in the project, we're just starting to dig into the cost estimating of the schematic design set of drawings. Schematic design is the earliest phase of design after comprehensive planning. It's the piece where we start to flesh out through the general sizes and adjacencies that we had developed in the planning process. We were fortunate to have our contractor on board, newly on board at that point, to give us their logistical expertise, but also their conversations with subcontractors and other contractors about market costs and conditions. As part of that process, we were doing those cost estimates. We got them back. They came back significantly higher than our budget. Fortunately, we already had a value engineering workshop that we had scheduled. This is something we do as a standard part of our modernizations, typically during schematic design, because that is when we have the most ability to impact the design and the costs moving forward. We already had planned that, generally speaking, with those, we bring together our design team, all of their subconsultants, our contractor, any subcontractors that they have on board, our project team, our internal stakeholders who are talking to folks from maintenance, from security, from all the folks that really need to have some input into design. And we sit down and we talk through, sort of what our values are for the project. We prioritize those values so that as we talk through cost reduction options, we ensure that what we're reducing costs are, we are keeping and prioritizing those values. For this particular value engineering workshop, we also brought in community members because this has been such a community-led process. It was really important for us to ensure that they continue to be part of these conversations. And this is a significant impact to the project that we were talking about. So we brought in some of our folks from our design advisory group, as well as community members who have been working with Colocate, which is our community engagement firm that has been helping us get messages back and forth between community members and community groups and those of us that are sort of sitting in the trenches of the project. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the workshop. It was very intensive. We spent a week there, a lot of people in the room and a lot of conversations. What I'll say is that it became really clear that the most significant driver of costs to this project was the fact that we were trying to keep students on site during construction. And, you know, to talk a little bit about that, what we were doing is we were going to keep them on site in what we call the 1909 building, which is the building that most people think of when they think of Jefferson. It's the primary building on site. That 1909, we say 1909, that's when it was built. It's unreinforced masonry, 4 stories. And what we were attempting to do was to build new buildings adjacent to that while we kept students in the 1909 structure, then move them into the new buildings so that we could go back into that building and do all the things to it that we needed to do to support it, to bring in new systems and to create new spaces. That essentially led to some challenges for us from a cost perspective. First of all, when you're phasing construction, you're shifting students out. So we're constantly having to think about what spaces they have access to, what they need in order to maintain their academic programming. We also have to think about protecting them. So this played out in a couple ways. We determined with the assistance of our contractor that supporting that 1909 structure during construction from a structural load perspective was going to be very, very complicated and very, very expensive. Unreinforced masonry, 4 stories. This is a building that already needs additional support. And we were essentially looking at digging out right next to it. And we were going to keep students and staff in the building when we were doing that. To do that safely, it was quite a bit. And I think it really took us having our contractors' expertise on the project to understand what the implications of that would be. In addition to that, the fact that we were moving students around and having to maintain spaces for them where they could get their full academic programming, no matter where they were, meant that we had a really inefficient layout for spaces. So when they were in the 1909 building, we needed to make sure they had everything. When we moved them into the new building, we had to make sure they had everything. Science classrooms, arts classrooms, theater spaces, all those things had to be recreated across 2 different spaces, which meant ultimately it was really inefficient. And we were adding square footage to the new building in particular in order to accommodate these needs that we wouldn't have to do across the site as a whole. So it just became very obvious that the only way for us to move the project forward on budget was to not maintain students on site. We've spent the last several weeks looking at relocation options. When we say relocation, that is synonymous with swing sites. We use both those terms. So you'll hear us say swing or swing site. That means moving them off site to another location to continue their education while we're doing the construction. We looked at several options. We've been discussing them with stakeholders. We have determined at this point that the Marshall campus is the best option for a swing site in order to address academics, athletics, and existing partnerships. We are communicating that out through various means. At the moment, we have had conversations with our internal steering committee, with our design advisory group. We have a Jefferson staff meeting coming up on Wednesday morning. On Wednesday evening, we will be meeting with families and students from the Jefferson community and from Jefferson cluster schools.
What day is that?
Wednesday, 6 p.m. in the library. We will also be meeting with our bond accountability committee next Monday. We'll be presenting the same information to them there. And we are going to continue working through what this means in terms of swinging to Marshall. When I say what this means, we have a lot of folks who have questions about some very particular things. We are working through a lot of those details, but just to note, the middle college program, sorry, it's a partnership more than a program, to be clear. That will be integrated at the Marshall campus. The details of that we are working through, and we're working through that with PCC. So we will make sure that that continues. It may continue in multiple iterations, and so we ask that everybody be flexible as make it work with the site that it's in. So we will look at PCC campuses that are closer to Marshall, as opposed to transporting students to the campus closest to Jefferson. We want to make sure that what we're doing is in the best interest of students. So we'll be looking through those details, working with PCC on those. We are also working on transportation. We will be providing transportation for students to Marshall, as well as transportation for middle college activities, for after school activities with SEI and other partners, existing partners. We will have more information on that as we work through that. But again, it's a lot of work in progress as we understand where students are coming from, where they need to go to, and how we can best get them there. We do recognize that this is not what anyone hoped for. I think we all tried very, very hard to keep students on site. Did everything we could until we realized it simply wasn't going to be possible. And so now we are listening very carefully to families and students and staff about the concerns that they have, and trying to figure out how we can best support everyone during the transition. We're also continuing to look forward to having a really beautiful state-of-the-art Jefferson. And I don't want to lose sight of that either. We anticipate this change in phasing. We will have students occupying the new modernized school in November of 2027. It's actually a year earlier than we would have been complete phased approach. So we're very happy that we were able to shorten the construction period from 4 years to 3 and get students in the school. And we are going to continue moving forward with all of the design work that we're currently doing. We're working very closely with our partners at the city, anticipating permits. So we have a special process that we're working through with the city, that they are partnering with us to prioritize Jefferson in the permitting process. And we are very appreciative of the work that they're doing to help us with that. And we will also be working through all the logistics for the swing site. So that is a big priority for us. And those meetings are going to intensify. Those details are going to be coming at us very fast. We're going to be communicating this out and having conversations. And DAG meetings will continue. Town halls are being planned for upcoming as well. And we continue to send out emails to the community.
Yes, good.
Thank you. So if basically going through the materials, looks like we've gotten back to the budgeted amount or the board approved amount, which I'm appreciative. Are we still able to, I'm assuming we're still able to deliver a building to our ed specs?
Absolutely.
And that is the school that we promised?
It is absolutely the school we promised to at ed specs, and we are adding everything on top of ed specs that we can afford to add on, given our budget.
And this is going to be a non-technical question, but I'm just curious with the 4 stories of unreinforced masonry, just me heartache. Is on something like that, is there ever an approach? Could you just replicate it, but with reinforced masonry? I mean,
That's a really interesting question. That is actually one of the things that we looked at in the value engineering workshop.
And I mean, people are no, we want the old bricks.
Well, I think the answer to that is we essentially end up with the same cost, but a longer timeline. And we lose the thing that people valued, which was the building itself, yeah.
Smell better.
And it's the history too, right? I mean, we talk about old bricks. Those are the old bricks that, you know, your parents and your grandparents touched as they went by. There's a
Yeah.
lot that's sort of contained in that from a cultural.
And to somebody who went to a closed high school, so I appreciate the appreciation for old bricks.
I was at Vincent, so.
You got your old bricks. I was just wondering, from like a safety standpoint, like it. So through the work, we can make it so that if it's
Amazingly safe, yes.
okay, great.
Yes.
And then I think my last two questions. I'm a little bit concerned that the costs doubled. I mean, I know it's back to where it was, but were you surprised by that, or what? How did we miss that when we initially talked about keeping students on site and the cost, or is it?
It's a fair question, and it's one we've asked ourselves a lot too. I think, you know, the challenge is we've never tried to support 4 stories of unreinforced masonry from literally right next door. We're not talking, you know, like a street away. The logistics of doing that and working around the construction site with that kind of support were so great. I don't know that we could have anticipated what that meant. We were so focused on really trying to honor that desire to have students stay on site.
And then to request, could you add Roosevelt High School and Franklin High School to the cost per square foot, just so we have all the high schools on it? I noticed it started with, I think, Grant versus the first.
I will go back and look. at the
Yeah, there's a
information.
chart that has that, but
We didn't necessarily intend, we sort of started at one point because we were like, okay, we need to stay really close. We need to be frame. But happy to go back and look at those.
and then the last question is, if we move it off site, because my understanding of the long-term staging was with Jefferson staying on site, that we could get started earlier with Cleveland or Ida B. Wells, because they're also swinging in there. So what impact does it have on those? I'm channeling.
Yes.
The Cleveland community and Andrew.
Of course, yeah, of course, and we're having those conversations internally as well. Ida B. Wells, you know, the conversation we had during the conceptual master planning process, prior to it being put on the bond measure, we anticipated they would have to swing on site, similar to how Lincoln did it. And in large part, that's because of the layout of their site, the opportunities that we have available there, the challenges of timing, et cetera. So there were a number of things that we kind of looked at with them. With Cleveland, we were very hopeful that we would swing to Marshall as sort of the baseline for the cost estimates we put together for the bond measure. Now, like everything that was done during the conceptual master planning, that's a baseline. When we go back through the comprehensive planning process, we will go back and truth all of the assumptions that went into that. And I think one of the things that we came across with Cleveland as we were doing the conceptual planning is that there were potentially multiple options for how we might move forward with the modernized Cleveland. Those are options we need to spend more time with. We are starting that comprehensive planning process right now. There are other options out there that may make sense for Cleveland.
They're attached to their bricks too.
They're also, yes. So there's a lot we're going to have to figure out over the next several months as we work through that planning process with Cleveland.
So it's not necessary. And I was just going to make a comment. I don't need to go further, but what you said about Ida B. Wells is different from our last board discussion. So it's something I'd like to circle around, not now.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions?
No, I think that it's a great idea. Roosevelt stayed on site and it was trash. And so I'm not really, I was never really in favor for Jeff to be on site because I felt they got a shabby job and I didn't want the 2 black schools in students of color to get a school that was not done well. And me and Dan have had this conversation. So I know Dan did a great job. This is not a nod to you. But yeah, so I feel like this should have been the option. We should have been trying to figure out how to work through and how to get to. Oftentimes, until you've actually gone through it, you don't realize all the effort that it takes to try to keep a student on site and do construction work at the same time. You're limited in what type of construction can be done during certain hours because of all the fact that you have kids there, the type of machinery and equipment that you have to have on site. All those different things change the game on what you can actually do, which in turn extend the amount of time you're going to be doing the work that you're doing. And when your heart is in, it's just like, no, I want my kids to stay. No, I don't want them to be moved. What if they don't want to come back? People are going to come back. They're going to come back. It is what it is. I respect everybody's ideas, concepts, thoughts around why this is important. At the end of the day, though, I want to make sure that we get a school that's not going to be subpar, that no stones are like left unturned. I want us to look at every single solitary thing. And I want to make sure that when they walk away from that school, that there's absolutely nothing that they have to hold their head down about. I want them to be walking through saying, this is the University of Jefferson versus, like they gave us a school. It has to be top notch. It just has to be. So I say, let's hurry up and get to it so that we can figure out what we go do with Cleveland and their attachment to their bricks.
Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I've taught in a school that under construction and it's awful. So I think the moving would be better in the long run for everybody. I just have a quick question about timeline. I know it's a little bit early, but so if we're moving Jefferson to Marshall, we're thinking 2-3 years, right? And then the hope is that Cleveland would also, so that means the earliest that Cleveland would be able to start would be 4 or 5 years.
So,
I know it's jumping, it's kind of ahead of the game a little bit, but I was curious.
so students would move out of Marshall back to Jefferson over the summer of 2027. So they could starting school, which would free up the Marshall campus at that point. However, it may be that the Marshall campus is not the best option.
Right.
And I think that is the piece that we have to go through this planning process and identify what we're doing in Cleveland in order to identify where students are. It also determines the timeline.
Where has there been, like, in terms of talks of other options, like what are there any other like ideas or inklings, or is it just kind of, I mean, I know you mentioned like sites and stuff like that.
For Cleveland.
For Jefferson.
For Jefferson, yes, there were other options that we looked at for relocation. We had some limitations on what we could look at based on zoning. So it's one of the constraints that always plagues us when we're looking to move an entire school somewhere. We initially looked at PCC. That was something that was a very popular suggestion, which is that we already have students going over to PCC to take classes as part of the Middle College partnership. Why couldn't we just move the entire school over there? Their zoning does not allow it, and there are no exceptions to that. So call that a fatal flaw. And we also looked at Kenton, which is a site that Kenton, however, is a former elementary school. It does not have the right types of spaces. We might have been able to fit the number of students, but we would not have been able to accommodate the programming for academics because it doesn't have science classrooms that we need. It doesn't have the arts classrooms that we need. It doesn't have CTE, dance program, etc. There were a number of really unique spaces that we didn't have. If you can't meet the educational program of students, it's not a good site for students to go to. So we recognize because closer, it's very appealing, but we also really need students to have their full educational experience during the time that the construction's occurring. So those are the other two sites that we looked at. Marshall really is the best option from an education perspective, gives us everything we need athletics space for our partners. The biggest challenge for them is the fact that it is farther away.
Well, really stupid question. I kind of wish I could ask this in private.
Don't worry about
Has
it.
there been any talk to like sharing a campus with, say, like the New Benson? So we know.
We've looked at everything. We certainly had that conversation. It's not a.
That's why I was sharing access.
Yeah.
Calm down, Gary.
Yeah.
Calm down, Gary.
Did I state?
We don't want to be there either. How about that?
I didn't say nothing.
Are you saying that there would be another option besides Marshall for Cleveland?
Certainly, some of the things that we looked at included swing, it included new construction, it included other sites for construction. There were a number of things that we needed to look at further. We need to go back through the conceptual planning at some point in the
Yeah,
future.
we'll get to the Cleveland one later.
Yeah.
Want to stay on.
Well, I just imagine we're gonna start hearing from it if.
Yeah, but we don't have to, we don't have to worry about today. Only worry about, only worry
We'll
once.
send the parents sick.
All right. So any other questions? Great. I really want to get into the bond.
Can I have another question?
I want to get into the bond stuff, but I want to really get into that. So I was trying to get at least an hour and a half if need be. That he got like 20 slides for that one.
He did.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
I
do
really-
want to point out, I have
Yeah,
some
he
slides.
I just wanted to make sure we got into that, because that's really something important. After this as well, our goal is to come up with a subcommittee for the bond program, so we can have a committee that's just focusing on the bond work. So we'll potentially have 2 meetings, one for bond only, and then a regular F&O committee stuff. That's the goal.
I was gonna say, did I hear that you forfeited your 5 slides over to the other?
Yeah, that's it. I have campus here.
I like it.
Thank you.
Density sharing. Okay. Okay, next topic is bond planning. We do have more than 5 slides. I do plan on this to be quick. It's high level, it's also dense. I mean, we can really get into a lot of details here. The intent is, this is our first conversation about bond planning. I'm really just hoping to introduce some topics and get into a lot of them later, but to at least get some thought going about some of the topics, and also just provide like a really big broad overview for those who haven't been through this process before. I certainly some have. So I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. Please stop me during it if there's questions. I'm totally happy to do that. This isn't overly formal. So talking about bond planning, general obligation bond planning, really what this process is just making a series of decisions over time and then revisiting those decisions over time. It's very much an iterative process. And our intent through this process is that decisions that are made by the board are informed decisions. You have data from staff, you have community input, etc. And the presumptive that will confirm date of the bond would be November of 2024. So the big decisions to make are when to go out for the bond, confirm that that's the right time. What's the size of the bond? How big is it, the dollar amount? And then what is the scope and the priorities that go into that bond? Ultimately, the board will refer the bond to voters and voters will make that decision. And during all this process, we will have community engagement, and the bond accountability committee plays a role as well. High level, how we're thinking about walking through this process, but we're happy to take feedback and pivot as necessary, is for the first couple of meetings to be pretty high level, introduce some concepts and some important components that go into decision making around general obligation bonds, and then get into the real specifics, sort of nitty gritty, with focus on things like the long range facilities plan, ADA plan, the decarbonization plan, security, seismic improvements, prioritization, that sort of stuff, and take these pieces at a time as we start to build sample bonds. So that's sort of the high level idea. When we get through this, you can tell me if you think that's a good.
I have a question. In 2012 and in 2017, it wasn't community engagement, but there was a community, I served on the bond stakeholder advisory group, the BSAG, in 2016. And it actually was a nice broad cross-section of the community, not just parents, but also people with expertise, and they were helpful in shaping and bringing like additional expertise and insights, and then also in passing the bond. And I'm curious, I mean, both times that happened, I was curious that I'm not seeing that here, and I know we didn't do that in 2020, but that was more because of the pandemic, and
Right.
you just couldn't have a meeting. But I'm
Yeah.
getting back to like, we were able to pull in a great group of people who provided did a lot of the work in terms of then when we actually had referred it to the voters, were engaged.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was a good model. And I do think we'll do something similar then. We haven't had time to put really that plan together. And so that input is helpful. I think one of the things for meeting two I left off here was to talk about that engagement plan. So come back and have something a little more detailed out to see if that's meeting what the committee thinks is the right approach. But I think we'll.
Yeah, so it's like less than an engagement, like getting people's one-off, but really
Yeah.
having help build it and bring some expertise and then get it over the finish line.
Yeah, I do think I think it worked well, both in 2012 and 2017. Okay. Super high level, why bonds, general obligation bonds are revenue that we can get that doesn't impact the general fund. The district has very significant capital needs, well into the billions of dollars. And capital revenue through the general fund or other sources such as grants or otherwise are pretty minimal on an annual basis. So general obligation bonds are really our opportunity for significant capital and to address the capital needs the district has. Typically, when we talk about bonds, we break them down into categories of work because it's just helpful to have these conversations. So we talk about physical facility improvements. Think of that as like fixing broken stuff. Versus educational improvements, which is more like curriculum and technology and providing modern classroom environments. Capacity is building new capacity where we might need it, or augmenting capacity where we might need it. And then modernizations are effectively a combination of all of those. I anticipate as we do this process, because we have a long-term capital improvement plan, and these are really a series of bonds, there will be questions about how previous scopes of work were prioritized. And so I think it's just good to surface. There are guiding documents, some that date back over a decade, like our original long-range facilities plan that helped guide the first 2 or 3 bonds, and things that those included were like focus the majority of the funds on modernizations, because that's the most efficient use of funds. Start modernizing with the high schools, then saving some funds for the highest facility needs. We also anticipate, and people bring up regularly in these conversations, what we called our sustainable financing plan. And what this was a model of how to maintain revenue over decades through a series of general obligation bonds. So to keep a long-term, multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar capital improvement program going. And at the very high level, the reason that and I bring this up, the reason that people sort of defer to 2024 is because of this plan. They think back to this plan, sometimes called the subway tile plan, say it's every 4 years. This is the model that the district is following. And we'll talk more about the principles and why that plan made sense and sort of where we are now and as we go along.
Have there been any deviations because of COVID to that plan?
There definitely have been deviations from those plans. That's why I put like an example on here. I think people remember this visual, but because of the sequence of bonds, it's not this clean anymore, how the debt financing works. And when we get into that conversation, I will definitely have to bring in finance people that are a lot smarter than me. So when someone says something like tranche, I am out of the conversation. I don't talk anymore. We also have more recent guiding documents, such as our facility condition assessment that was completed in 2020 and our long-range facilities plan in 2021. The intention is that, we'll have more detailed conversations about these documents as we get into building of these sample bonds. And then, of course, we have a track record already of 3 bonds that have been passed in the last decade with pretty impressive approval rating in the 2020 bond, the 75% approval. So the next two topics, the financing and timing are really quick, but I'll just pause if there's any specific questions so far. Okay. We will definitely, as we go through this process, we will constantly talk about the financing and how the impact of financing or the terms of financing impact this bond and potentially future bonds, high level bonds or loans. So we can think of bonds, this is the simple way, and I don't know if finance people will kick me for comparing it to like a conventional mortgage, but the idea of these are loans, so bonds, when we issue bonds, they have insurance. And if you have long-term bonds or long-term loans, the amount of interest you pay compared to principal is high. If it's short-term, they're much lower. So it's just think about that, because when we start to get into, when we start saying, what's the right size of the bond, we'll start having conversations about the amount of principal compared to interest. And then this is kind of more of the same thing, the sustainable financing plan, really the tenets of that. If you do pay as you go, these short-term bonds, you take manageable bites, then you can cap your tax rates after the second issue, bond. And third, fourth, and subsequent bonds you can refer to as a renewal, because you're retiring debt. At the same time, you're asking voters for new debt. I realize that probably just sounds like a bunch of words, but I swear it will come back later when we bring in our financial advisors.
Okay, so just one question about that. So we're talking about our second bond, which was 700 something million, 790. So are you saying that if we cap it there, that means every bond after the 1.2 will be at the 790?
It's
Or
the
that
rate.
the tax rate would be at?
It's the rate.
Okay.
Right, so the subway tile has the x-axis, the vertical. What that is trying to show is the tax rate, and saying, if you follow a plan like this after your second bond, that will be the top of your tax rate. So that third bond, it slides in there because you are retiring debt at the same time you're asking to issue new debt.
And so if we went out again in November of 2024 with a renewal, do we have an approximate understanding of how much that would raise?
Good question. And these are the ones where we're going to want our financial advisors to come in and kind of present. And I'm thinking of the form of printing, like kind of small, medium, large, because the bond debt structure we have now is not primarily short term. A lot of it is long term. So when we think of the very first bond in 2012, the district didn't have any capital debt. That's the right term, but didn't have any debt we're paying against general obligation bonds. So it was a clean slate. So there was no existing regular payments to think about to go against that taxable value that comes in. We now have debt. So it's not a clean slate. So when we look at a 2024 bond, we need to think the revenue that's coming in is already paying for debt that we've issued. So the question is, do we have enough to get what we want with just a renewal, or do we consider increasing or consider longer debt? And then I think really the question is 2028 realistic if we do longer debt? If we following the
the next
4-year
one
cycle.
go like 29 or 30 or something.
I think Carol recommended or mentioned maybe a 6-year.
Carol has, with Piper Jaffray, our financial advisors, has talked about considering how the debt is, and I won't speak for her, she's way smarter than me, but you might consider getting off that sequence. Which is, I think, like a quick segue to timing about when we think about the timing of the bond. I submit we want to think not just of this one, but that next one. Think about this bond, the upcoming bond, and the over capital program and things that will come into play. Well, how will this one affect future ones? Also, how much existing work do you have? If you go in 2024, where are you with your current work and how much money do you have? And do you need to go about that? And I honestly think that's less of a conversation about 2024 than is 2020. I think I said one more.
That's the same one.
It is the same. I don't know why I did.
You wanted to start.
I guess it's it. Or I just did on accident. So that's really in the presentation. In some feedback, that any feedback that you have for staff is helpful. But one thing that, you know, we're sort of curious about is are there initial priorities you think that you think will need to be in the 2020 budget, or, you know, kind of a top tier consideration, whether that be categories of work or these are just different types of work that fit within those categories. And those categories aren't, that's a wavy line. It's a super hard line. But these are some things that we know we need to address, and then, you know, that we've also heard about. So I'll stop there, see if there's any other questions, and feedback I have.
Questions?
So I'm gonna go back to one of the early pages. One thing I didn't see on here that I mean, it's a pretty standard list of all of the capital needs we have. Is air conditioning moving up your list of items? It's not on here. And I know we spent a lot of time on ventilation, but I'm curious, I say everything else are things that I think are pretty standard.
Yeah.
Things that we've talked about in the past, but air conditioning hasn't been on the list because we live in Portland.
Yeah, we do. We do think about air conditioning. So all of our new modernization of air conditioning and all of our HVAC replacements or mechanical system replacements that we're doing now. Heat is the bigger concern because one, we're in school longer during the winter, and so heat is actually our number one work order, or number one. It's lack of heat, but those come together. So updated mechanical system also has air conditioning. Smaller scale air conditioning is really challenging, like, you know, the local units, the window units, that type of stuff. We were looking at actually lots of different options to do that. But really the best way for mechanical cooling is to replace the whole system from a capital perspective for certain. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so it would be, well, yes, it's on your radar screen. You're thinking about it. So when we see an HVAC upgrade, usually does that means that
air conditioning comes with it. So when it's a replacement, absolutely. Sometimes we might say we're doing HVAC improvements. You use HVAC often shorthand for mechanical, even if there's not air conditioning in it. It's just short term that people use. But if we're doing a mechanical system replacement, any of our new schools, they have air conditioning. That's part.
one of the things that I'd be interested in is seeing what the list of schools they have, but besides all the new high schools. And then overlaying it with the Portland heat map. So those schools that are in sort of the 82nd to 205 corridor are with a lot fewer trees, a lot hotter. Same thing with all the schools around down I-5. And just where we have air conditioning, just because those schools are a lot hotter than if you're sitting in a shaded.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We'll do that for two reasons. One, just to ID where we have air conditioning, which isn't very many schools. I think it's a dozen-ish. And also we're piloting different programs to try and cool schools with different ways. And I won't go into details there, but we just don't have a lot of data, either of which schools are the hotter schools or which classrooms. So it's pretty anecdotal data we have now. So we're trying to figure out better ways of where are those actually more uncomfortable spaces, so we can try to target these pilots that we're trying to do there, and ultimately the improvements, if it's window film or something else, then that works well. Yeah, we'll do that for sure.
Anyone got any other questions?
No, I'm good.
I'll just
Go
keep
ahead, go ahead.
And this is maybe for you, Gary, is what do you envision as the process? Because there's always like billions of dollars, and then how we're going to go through our prioritization process. Is usually that's how, you know, everybody, their project should be in the list. So I'm curious at how you're gonna lead that.
Yes, I think that's when we bring in the bond subcommittee to kind of look at how do we start, once we get all the stuff together, how do we start prioritizing, you know, things. One suggestion would be looking at stuff that's, well, first directly affect kids, right? So like athletics, right? you know, that directly affects kids, you know, and then just kind of look at it. Just a suggestion, you know, of looking at it that way, like how it's going to directly affect our kids first. Needs that we have to do, like ADA, accessibility needs, you know, so looking at it in those type of ways. But I think that's something when we have the subcommittee kind of go over how to prioritize, but that'd be my suggestion if I'm on that or not.
Just another, this is. Sure, it's a question, but 2 years ago, I think, we put money in the budget and we did for a bond report to the community. It was after the lead in the water crisis, lead in the paint and everything else. And actually, most of the report to the community focused on the modernizations, which our polling showed was not the main, that wasn't the reason why people passed I mean, the schools are beautiful, but people really voted for the bond because of the 150 million for health and safety. And I'm health, safety and accessibility. And so I'm wondering about, just as I look through this timeline, if we have an opportunity to communicate really specifically to the broader community about the upgrades that have been made, say.
So when you say broader community, what did that look like?
So for example, we did a mailing to the whole district. I mean, it's pretty standard. A lot of districts do it. I mean, the city does it. If you've got a big bond project. So for example, in my mind, so I'm going to go back in time in 95. We
Is it 95? Just
last century, I know, but been around a long time. There was a 95 bond that then lasted for 17 years because we couldn't go back out because we were going for operating dollars. But like there was a mailing that was sent out. It wasn't a glossy thing. It was kind of like not newsprint, but it didn't look glossy, but it had like each school and like, here's the improvements that are happening in your neighborhood school. So that people could see, because especially a lot of the health and safety ones, I mean, parents are pretty concerned, like, did my school get a, lead drinking water improvements or what seismic improvements have happened? But we have generally done work on almost all schools. Libraries does this, Parks does that. Like, here's what's happening. Here's what happened in your neighborhood. You write a pretty big check and then you don't ever hear like what happened. So I'm interested in that next year about how we're going to communicate effectively what we.
That sounds like you're volunteering for the subcommittee.
Yeah, well, and communicating about it, putting money in the budget because it's $2.12 is a lot.
Yeah.
On top of everything else.
And we are doing that in process already where we have a mailer that we're drafting. It's going to go, I think, fairly soon, but we plan to do like a series of them. So hitting on some specific, but we can talk about what's that best target group, especially when we start thinking about voters. And what the data is telling us is the important thing.
So I'm thinking if anybody have any other questions around the slides. Good.
I'm good.
All right. So one thing about the subcommittee piece, I think we probably want to get started with the first part of September. And they should probably be alternate weeks. Or I think we talked about doing it like the hour before. Can't remember what we talked about.
I think either way works.
So what do we do is between today and probably the first, thinking we'll probably get maybe 3 folks for the bond accountability subcommittee. I will get you their names. I will ask the rest of the board who wants to be on that. And then you can try to set up a time and schedule with them. To figure out, what days, but I think my goal is that we start the first part of September, like that right after Labor Day. We can start that early. I'll get you a list of 3 folks. Well, we're list is 2 because Julie director members already volunteered. And then we'll just start that process with that. And then what we do is maybe once every 2 months, we will have them report back here. And then kind of go from there and see how that works.
Seem like a plan for you?
Yeah, sounds good. Just with the first meeting, a little grace if on like topics, if we don't have all the information yet,
Oh, yeah.
what I'm thinking about.
There's gonna be a lot, so. Over that parking, figure that out. Anybody have any other questions, comments? Anybody here wants to be on the subcommittee?
I don't mind being on. I think you should see if somebody else wants to get in, but I could,
So you're yes, if nobody else wants to.
I'm one of them people.
Oh,
I'm one of them people. I'll get on it.
I would actually, but I know you own a lot already. I'm gonna just ask just out of courtesy. You don't have to, no pressure.
Now I'll think about it.
Okay,
Can I ask a question?
yeah,
What's the goal of on subcommittee?
to get to this, the end road for this,
Like the prioritization?
everything,
The referral.
the referral and all that stuff, and then they just bring that back up to us, and then we refer it to the board and go from there. But the goal for the subcommittee is to literally deal with all of this.
How we're gonna push it out to the voters, what that marketing is gonna look like, how we're gonna get everybody on board, how we're gonna rally all the people together. Because I believe at that point, it becomes on us to go out and beat the drum.
Fundraise.
And say, this is what we need to do. It moves from being a staff thing to being a us thing, saying this is what we need, this is why we need it. We got to get in front of everybody. So this is when we use the political capital that we have to go out and shake hands and kiss babies and say, I'm gonna need you to put some of your money up to help us get some of this material out there because we got to get this done and we need everybody to know. So shake hands, kiss a baby, and give me $100,000. Let's go. That's the situation.
And then so that this
Simple.
committee doesn't have to take that work on, that the subcommittee would focus on it and then bring it back to this larger.
Yeah, from my understanding, once it gets ready to go out, then the board at that point takes the reins and fundraise and push it and all that stuff.
Will it come
Once
back
it
to
all
this
gets done.
group before it goes out to the board for review?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so.
It here first.
It goes from the subcommittee back here.
And then we'll refer
And
it to
then
the
we refer
board.
it to the board. The board then says, yes, this is what we want to do. We like it.
We gotta get to work.
And then we start working all over again.
May I ask, just to clarify?
Yes.
Is the subcommittee meant to be composed of members of the facilities and operations?
Doesn't
committee?
have to be.
Doesn't have to, so it's not necessarily a subcommittee of this committee, it's sort of a special committee of the board.
Well, it'd be a subcommittee of this committee, just will have other board members, could potentially have other board members on it. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Comments? All right, meeting adjourned. All right. 5:30.
Real time.
Hour.
You real time.
Good.
boy. You real time. You real time.
Hey,